Welcome back to The Explainer. So if you spent literally any time on the internet back in 2025, you definitely remember the absolute storm that surrounded the first season of Netflix's Devil May Cry. I mean, produced by Shankar, brought to life by Studio Mir, it was one of those shows that split the room right down the middle, right? Hardcore gamers and casual viewers were constantly clashing over lore changes and those kind of heavy-handed political allegories. But grab your red trench coat and lace up those combat boots, because Season 2 has officially blasted its way onto our screens. We're skipping the agenda today and just jumping right into the thick of it.
Okay, let's dive into this because this right here is the ultimate question we absolutely have to answer today. Is this new batch of 8 episodes the epic redemption arc the series desperately needed? Or is it just another flashy, kind of hollow attempt to adapt one of gaming's most sacred franchises? We are going to review this season at an absolute freight train pace today, looking at the good, the bad, and the completely unhinged.
Section 1, The Son of Sparta returns. Let's talk about that relentless pacing right out of the gate.
So, the writers waste absolutely zero time trying to reintroduce you to this world. Season 2 hits the accelerator from frame 1. It builds directly on top of that wild cliffhanger that left our favorite pizza-loving demon-slaying protagonist, Dante, quite literally frozen on ice by the shadow government organization, Darkcom. Now, keeping your main character out of commission in a high-tech freezer for a good chunk of the early runtime, that is an incredibly bold narrative choice. But it actually forces the story to slow down and look at the collateral damage.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why that choice works so well. By literally keeping Dante on ice, the show actively gives the spotlight over to Lady, leaving her to wrestle with the crushing guilt of her actions from the previous season's finale. You know, this expands the show's scope way beyond a simple one-man monster of the week slaughterhouse. We actually get to see the real human cost of all this demonic chaos.
But let's be real for a second. We came for the storm that is approaching. The absolute crown jewel of this season is the formal, grand introduction of Dante's twin brother, Vergil. We've got Johnny Young Bosch bringing that perfect, balanced swagger to Dante, and that contrasts just beautifully against Robbie Damon's stoic, commanding presence as Vergil. The electric, totally chaotic sibling chemistry between these two actors is what anchors the entire show. When they share the screen, the whole thing transforms from a generic action cartoon into a deeply personal family tragedy.
Section 2, Redeeming Devil May Cry 2. This brings us to what is perhaps the most surprising meta-narrative pivot of the entire season.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that we are looking at a redemption story, and not just for the characters, but for the actual franchise itself. If you know the games, you know the 2003 release of Devil May Cry 2 is universally considered a disaster. We're talking a tragically boring Dante and a super uninspired plot. But against all logical odds, the 2026 anime takes the fractured, messy pieces of that exact game and somehow glues them all back together. Miraculously, Shankar's team turned the franchise's biggest black sheep into a relentless, linear freight train of a compelling narrative. And the main architect of all that chaos is Arius. So instead of a totally forgettable boss, we get this delightfully malicious corporate executive who doubles as a cult leader. By aligning him with the zealous Vice President Baines and having him hunt down the Arcana artifacts to summon Argasax the Chaos, the show manages to maintain a bit of that corporate paranoia, but it entirely ditches the heavy-handed political allegories we saw in Season 1. Honestly, it's an incredibly straightforward, high-stakes fantasy plot that just absolutely works. Section 3, A New Metal Renaissance. We literally can't talk about Devil May Cry without talking about Studio Mir's aesthetics and its aggressively loud presentation.
Studio Mir has seriously outdone themselves here. They are delivering what feels exactly like a 2003 anime music video aesthetic, but polished up with a multi-million-dollar budget. The kinetic, staggeringly expressive fight choreography easily, and I mean easily, surpasses the somewhat generic animation loops we got in the debut season. The bar for animated carnage is set astronomically high right from the very first bombastic assault.
And framing all that gorgeous carnage is the music. The soundtrack leans so hard into performative edginess, it is absolutely stuffed to the brim with licensed tracks from Korn, Papa Roach, and Evanescence. Having Dante and Vergil clash blades while Evanescence's Afterlife blares in the background, that is a massive swing. Now, whether you love it or totally roll your eyes at it is going to depend entirely on your 2000s nostalgia tolerance. It is loud, it is edgy, and it makes zero apologies for it.
Just listen to this third-party validation from Bloody Disgusting. They said, Devil May Cry is the best television series you'll see this year that blares corn during its final showdown. That quote just perfectly encapsulates how successfully the show nails this incredibly specific, hyper-stylized vibe. Section 4. Sibling Rivalry and Flaws. Let's move to the objective critiques and see how this builds into the emotional core of the series.
You see, the show desperately needs context for all this non-stop action, right? And it actually finds it through structural flashbacks. By constantly juxtaposing the brothers' present-day violence with their shared childhood trauma, the series gives this massive emotional weight to all the carnage. These deep dives into the lore of their father, Sparta, and the Demon King Mundus really fill in the blank spaces between the old game cutscenes. It shows us two broken brothers who chose completely opposite paths to deal with the exact same pain.
So the crucial point is, while the ambition here is sky high, the execution isn't always flawless. You have this gorgeously detailed traditional 2D animation for the characters, but it's occasionally placed right next to incredibly awkward, clunky 3D CG backgrounds and monster models. It's definitely not quite as prevalent as Season 1, but this stark visual contrast can occasionally slap you right out of the immersive experience. And impartially speaking, there are narrative casualties here too. The relationship between Dante and Lady shifts from this active hostility we saw in Season 1 to a rushed, borderline toxic codependency here, and it really doesn't give the characters room to actually grow or communicate. Plus, the show kind of flirts with wearing out its welcome. There's a real danger of sheer repetition when you have so many new metal battles that start to just blend into one big crimson blur. And honestly, at times the series relies far more on flashing a fan service weapon like Ebony and Ivory rather than executing clever combat strategy. Section 5. The Final Verdict. Keeping all of those highs and lows in mind, it's time to accelerate into our rapid-fire buyer's guide for the season. This is easily the most common question we see. Do you need to watch Season 1 before jumping into this nuanced 2000s nostalgia trip? The answer is swiftly and definitively yes, you absolutely must. Because Season 2 picks up immediately after the cliffhanger. You really have to understand the established status quo of Dark Calm, Lady's guilt, and Dante's captivity. If you try to skip Season 1, you are going to be entirely confused as to why the main character starts the show locked inside a giant block of ice. Let's quickly consolidate the remaining facts for you. The season is a tight 8 episodes, which all dropped on May 12, 2026, so making it an incredibly easy weekend binge. The original, beloved voice cast returns, and they are in top form. And looking ahead? Well, with massive fan engagement and world building that pretty much leaves the door wide open, a Season 3 adapting Devil May Cry 3 seems highly likely. Which leaves us with one final thought today. Are you ready to embrace the loud, violent, and unashamedly stylish spectacle? Listen, if you are looking for a perfectly pristine, one-to-one lore adaptation, you might find things to complain about. But if you can accept the 2000s edge, forgive a few narrative flaws, and just hold on for the ride, this season is an improvement in almost every single metric. It proves there is still so much pulse-pounding life left in this franchise. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you in the next one.